Please be seated. Good afternoon, everybody. And my special good afternoon and welcome to Professor Turnhout. Esther, very much welcome. It is your day today. And let me welcome your family, your partner, Jerry, children, Luke and Anna, the parents, the brother with the partner, and of course, the colleagues, friends, professors from other universities, those who are interested in the topic today and in this interesting event and the topic of a better knowledge is possible. Before I invite Esther, let me tell you about her interesting journey in science. And I fully understand that we all have our interesting journeys, but today it is her day. So she was appointed as the professor in science, technology, and society at the Faculty of Behavior Management and Social Sciences in this university on September 1, 2021, so almost a year ago. It is a very interesting journey, as I see. In 1996, she earned her master's degree from Vrije Universiteit in Environmental Sciences. In 2003, she earned her PhD degree at the same university under supervision of Professor Herman Ijzakers, whom I welcome today especially. She went to Wageningen University and studied as the UD, University Docent, assistant professor, in the Forest and Nature Conservation Policy Group. Am I right? And from 2016, she became, and I will say it in Dutch, persoonlijke hoogleraar. If I translate it into English, personal professor is a little bit strange. Persoonlijk hoogleraar. And in Wageningen, she already gave her inaugural address. It was about the politics of environmental knowledge. Today, the story will be slightly different. Next to the direct scientific career, of course, Esther is very committed to the societal questions researcher. She is the editor-in-chief of the journal Environmental Science and Policy, and she is the director of the Netherlands Graduate Research School of Science, Technology, and Modern Culture. And today, it is her day, as I said, and let's welcome Professor Turnhout to the podium.
Well, here we go. So thank you, esteemed Rector Magnificus, dear colleagues, friends, and family. Thank you all for coming. It's truly overwhelming, such an honor and privilege to share this occasion with you. So the title of my lecture paraphrases Boaventura de Sousa Santos' book entitled Another Knowledge is Possible. In this book, he argues that Northern epistemologies are based on a logic of top-down control, and they provide injustices. In this lecture, I will build on this central point to argue not only that science continues to do this, and the pictures in the slide, for those of you who are familiar with Dutch nature and agricultural policy, will recognize this. So not only that science continues to do this, but also that science has in fact become an obstacle for the transformative changes that we need. I will also outline a vision for research that will help build a better knowledge, a knowledge that is just, and a knowledge that is pluralist, and that fosters human and ecological well-being. So I will start by stating the obvious. We are in trouble. The worlds in which we live are rapidly changing under the influence of the intersecting crises of not just climate change and biodiversity loss, but also growing inequality. These crises share the same root causes, And these root causes also continue to accelerate. So the continued fixation of our economic policies on growth, indexed by the flawed metric of gross domestic products, continue to drive overproduction and overconsumption. They accelerate inequality and they result in the exploitation, not just of nature, but also of people. Despite promises to the contrary, our governments continue to fund and incentivize the destruction of our planet at scales that dwarf investments in nature and sustainability. This unfettered continuation of exploitation and destruction is rationalized through powerful narratives that economic growth is necessary and beneficial for all, that we can rely on technologies and on corporations to fix our problems, and that climate and nature are expensive and therefore bad for jobs and people. These narratives are false. We know that growth in domestic product disproportionately benefits an increasingly small part of the population, and that trickle-down economics does not work. We know that at best, corporate sustainability initiatives only slow down environmental degradation. And we know that there's no evidence of the decoupling of GDP growth from resource use. And we know that nature-inclusive alternatives are possible. So if we have all this evidence that demonstrates the decline in nature, the lack of effectiveness of current approaches, and the availability of alternatives, how can this situation persist? Antonio Gramsci's notion of cultural hegemony is useful here. This concept highlights that the domination of people and nature operates not just through physical or material processes, but also through ideas. The false narratives I mentioned just now are continuously being promoted, not just by corporations, but also by the state, the media, and education systems. They have been so successful that they're seen as natural and as common sense. As Gramsci explains, cultural hegemony leads to a situation in which people develop a concept of success and well-being that serves the interests of the powerful. Consequently, the unjust and destructive consequences of these narratives are either hidden from view, they're cast as individual choice or individual failure, or they are accepted as natural and inevitable. And in our current society, we need to recognize the contribution of science to maintaining this cultural hegemony. And of course, I know that scientific research has and continues to criticize these false narratives, and that it also contributes to alternatives. However, by and large, science and technology are failing us. Anti-colonial scholarship has pointed to the intimate connections between science, technology, colonialism, and capitalism. As many commentators have observed, science is not just a neutral tool to be used in colonialism and capitalism, it is a core foundation. The worldview of science is one that cuts up the world into nature and culture, subject and object, human and non-human. And this worldview enables exploitation and extraction. And it does so by casting nature as separate from humans, by expressing it as objects, as natural resources, as goods, or more recently as services, and by applying calculative methods to optimize their production. The similarities between the language and practices of the natural sciences and those of colonialism and capitalism are not a coincidence. As Vandana Shiva has noted, the monocultures on our land result from monocultures of the mind. So cultural hegemony makes it actually possible for colonialism to continue by other means. And as this map shows, uneven patterns of exploitation and destruction continue, also in the current age, and they follow colonial lines. Capitalist values and neocolonial inclinations can also be recognized in those sciences that aim to inform and contribute to sustainability. Expert organizations like the IPCC for climate or IPBES that I'm more familiar with for biodiversity have defined their role as those who speak the truth about climate and biodiversity to power, so to governments and to policymakers. This is called the linear model. And in fulfilling this function, they have taken a dominant orientation towards quantitative modeling to assess the state of the planet and identify drivers of change. This orientation works well for their audience, but it also signals a problematic situation in which science and policy are locked into a tight relationship and a specific mode of working together that is difficult to break out of. Science and policy both rely on the idea of a singular planetary system that can be described in a neutral way by science, which then produces knowledge that can be used in policy to govern this planetary system. This locked-in situation, however, creates a number of problems. The first problem is that taking the planet as the object of knowledge production risks injustice. We have large inequities between those who are most responsible for and those who are most vulnerable to the consequences of environmental degradation. But expressions that refer to a global we, such as the well-known phrase, "we are all in the same boat," obscure this inequality. Yet this notion of a global we is supported by environmental modeling and assessment and by the use of abstract global aggregates and concepts such as drivers. Such abstractions are not only inactionable, they also allow for the evasion of responsibility, and they result in inadequate problem framings and unjust solutions. For example, the highly problematic frame that considers population growth as the main cause of environmental degradation continues to be enabled by these forms of knowledge. The second problem is that sustainability science operates on a dangerous illusion of neutrality. So many see neutrality as indispensable for the production of truth. But it is not just unattainable, it is actually harmful. In this quote, Julia Steinberger discusses the use of so-called negative emission technologies in IPCC modeling. These technologies, such as direct air capture, carbon storage, or massive tree planting, either do not exist or are unlikely to ever be effective at sufficient scale, but they do exist in the models. And their imagined climate benefits are used to delay the reduction of emissions. Thus, by incorporating these technologies in modeling, the IPCC serves vested interests. Steinberger suggests that being critical about requests to model these imaginary technologies would be seen as political, and the IPCC does not allow that. But the assumption that their incorporation in modeling is in any way neutral is, of course, deeply problematic. A third problem is the imperialist hubris of much of sustainability science. In her book, A Billion Black Anthropocenes or None, Catherine Youssef powerfully dissects the discourse of the Anthropocene as it features in sustainability science. This discourse, she argues, reproduces the superiority of Western science in diagnosing the end of the world. But it also shows the failure of the West to recognize the other worlds that it has ended and that it continues to end in the making of its own development and freedom. Moreover, she shows how sustainability science actually furthers neocolonialism as it subsequently casts the West, a West that has now woken up to the fact that it might no longer be able to protect itself against its own destructive tendencies, as the savior of the world. This, as she puts it, reveals a desire to overcome coloniality without a corresponding relinquishing of power. The responsibility for the world is articulated anew as the white man's burden, a paternalism that is tied to a redemptive narrative of saving the world from harm on account of others. So the bleak conclusion of this is that the role of current sustainability science can be seen as the accountant of destruction, a detached bystander that calculates and reports on the end of the world as accurately as possible. The subsequent calls for societal change that it makes are stunted due to a combination of a problematic scientific orthodoxy and political naivety. The misguided idea of neutrality and the fear of being seen as political have resulted in knowledge that serves vested interests, that reproduces the status quo, that ignores power, including the power and coloniality of science, and that fails to actually support the much-needed transformations that it continues to call for. So all in all, science has largely kept intact the cultural hegemony of neocolonialism and capitalism, and it continues to facilitate the rationalization and normalization of the resulting exploitation, extraction, and destruction of people and nature. To a considerable extent, the social sciences have fallen victim to the same developments. Also in these fields, the framing of research problems is often dominated by instrumental, technocratic and hubristic logics that aim to solve problems that are assumed to simply exist. Conceptualizations of method in the social sciences also tend to facilitate extractivist and dehumanizing practices. They cast researchers as detached observers that can extract data from research subjects and force fit these data into predefined categories. And they cast research subjects as data points instead of analysts and knowledge holders in their own right. As Catherine McKittrick notes, discipline is empire. So it is no wonder that many social sciences exhibit similar neocolonial tendencies. Now, there are parts of science that try to address the problems that I have outlined. They aim to improve the actionability of knowledge and go beyond easy techno fixes. In this context, we've seen the emergence of a participatory turn in knowledge production. And one of these approaches is citizen science. And I'm thrilled to note that this is a priority theme of this university. I believe that this can truly pave the way for exciting new ideas and practices in education and research. However, it is important to be mindful of the diversity within citizen science. Some initiatives, such as Public Lab or Clear Lab, take an explicit environmental justice approach, where the aim is to produce science that serves the needs of communities. Yet, an increasingly dominant interpretation of citizen science does the exact opposite. Here, citizen science benefits science because it forms a low-cost tool to increase data collection and data analysis capacity. So we really need to pay close attention here and to ensure that we avoid using citizens and that we address their needs. So the example of citizen science makes clear that participation in science and technology is challenging and that it can often, despite good intentions, produce negative outcomes. There are 3 reasons why this happens. First of all, processes that simply invite all perspectives and stakeholders to the table without actually addressing power often result in the strengthening of existing power inequalities, not in their leveling out, as is often the hope. Second, processes that prioritize consensus or integration often end up excluding those voices that are seen as unreasonable and uncooperative. And this violates the aim to be inclusive of diverse perspectives that these processes often start out with. And the third challenge is related to their transformative impact. In quite a few governance domains in the Netherlands, we see a proliferation of pilots and projects, and the domain of agriculture is full of them. And while it can certainly be useful to create safe spaces for experimentation and co-production, we need to recognize that their impact is limited by design. Pilots exist because institutional change is not seen as desirable or possible. They exist because they're harmless and because they do not threaten dominant actors' interests in institutions. So even in these innovative approaches to knowledge production, we see that they often end up reproducing old patterns, old knowledge hierarchies, and that they facilitate to actually support the transformative changes that we need. To more fully understand why these problems persist, we need to take a step back and recognize the role and importance, but also the inevitability of framing. Facts do not, and they cannot speak for themselves. Rather, facts and values entwine in frames about what the problem is, and these frames are not innocent, because they not only define the items that the issue consists of, but also what solutions are possible and rational and what knowledge is relevant. It is important to recognize that this is what we often call effective. If the production of knowledge and its uptake take place in a singular frame, we will consider this to be an example of an effective science policy interface. But to take this as a sign of success is a mistake. The example of the IPCC and negative emission technologies provides a useful reminder of this, but there are many more examples of how seemingly usable knowledge and effective science policy interfaces create and sustain bad political and societal outcomes. Unfortunately, many scientists fail to fully appreciate their complicity in these bad outcomes and take responsibility for them. They don't think that this is their problem. And consequently, the scientific community continues to resist proposals to transform science. In part, this is related to a fear for loss of authority, funding, or careers. But another reason is the blindness created by false ideals of neutrality and objectivity. Science will continue to reinforce dominant values, interests, and knowledge systems because questioning them is seen as political, while not questioning them is seen as neutral. And this will continue to normalize and justify the exclusion or co-optation of marginalized perspectives and knowledges. And in so doing, science has become an obstacle for transformation. Due to this refusal of science to change, knowledge inequities continue to persist. And I'll give just 2 examples. First, a recent article in Nature states that only 5% of total global research funding in agriculture is relevant for smallholders, while they make up 70% of global farmers, and they are essential for food sovereignty and food security. Second, many commentators have noted that to address sustainability challenges, the biggest research needs are in the social sciences and in collaborative research to identify barriers and obstacles and to design solutions and options for action. Yet a study of climate research funding shows that the social sciences receive only 0.12% of total funding. This marginalization is actively kept in place, also in interdisciplinary research. My extensive experience in interdisciplinary collaboration, including in research projects, committee work, and global integrated assessments, is that these spaces are dominated by natural scientists, with social scientists in a minority position. Moreover, and more importantly, I think, these spaces are dominated by particular natural science-based integrated frameworks that define what counts as interdisciplinarity. These frameworks define the puzzle, so to say, and then they also define how the different disciplinary pieces should then fit. Knowledge that does not fit within these frameworks, that resists integration, or that questions the puzzle altogether and criticizes these supposedly integrated frameworks will be excluded. So ironically, interdisciplinary research in my experience considers the reduction and co-optation of diversity as a requirement for its success. Paraphrasing McKittrick, interdisciplinarity is discipline, is empire. As we know from feminist and Black studies, marginalization leads to further marginalization. If your value is not evident to those in power, they will see this not as a result of marginalization, but as a reason for further marginalization. This is, for example, what makes it possible for VVD Member of Parliament Van der Woude recently in Science Guide to openly question the contribution of social sciences and humanities to the economy and society. and to suggest that more money should be allocated to technology, information sciences, and medicine. So in the social sciences, we are often told that our job is not to be critical, but to be constructive. In a situation of tight funding, where much of that funding is conditional in narrowly defined goals, our role gets cast in instrumental terms. We need to provide solutions or create public support for science and technology. If we openly question whose problems we should be solving and whether science and technology actually deserve support, this puts us out of the funding game. Alternatively, if we want to be included, we can only do so by allowing ourselves to be co-opted in dominant discourse. Either way, we are left without a voice. This is one reason why Gayatri Spivak poses the question whether the subaltern can speak, and also why she answers it with an unequivocal no. And things, of course, get progressively worse for those who face intersecting forms of oppression on the basis not just of paradigm, but also race, gender, or knowledge system. So all in all, critical research, including critical research about science, that threatens the status quo will not get funded, and it will not get done. And when it gets done, it will either not be noticed, or it will pose a threat to those that undertake it. Drawing on the work by Lindsay McGooey, this constitutes the production of ignorance about transformative change. The field of Science and Technology Studies, or STS, has a lot to offer to address these deep-seated problems of science and technology. And I'm proud to work in a department that has done groundbreaking work in the ethics and constructive assessment of technology, and that has created innovative transdisciplinary approaches to co-design knowledge and technologies that promote public values. I'm also proud to work at a university that has made the bold decision to integrate reflection on science and technology in all its bachelor programs. For sure, research practices in STS have not been immune to the problems identified in this lecture. Also in STS, we've seen an uncritical over-reliance on protocolized methodologies and participation, and a general reluctance to question dominant frames in society, policy, and industry. It is, however, a testament to the vibrancy of the field that it has also been STS researchers that have been among the fiercest critics in pointing to these problems and the most innovative in developing alternatives. As powerful voices in Black and anti-colonial studies, posthumanism, and feminist and activist STS insist a better knowledge is possible. It has to be. The single most important requirement for such better knowledge is to ensure that it does better things. And for this, we need to put justice center stage. Just action for humans and nature has to take priority over the accuracy and presumed neutrality of knowledge, over instrumental and simplistic solutionisms, and over knowledge that is relevant or perhaps better, palatable for elites. In sustainability science, this means that research must focus on the common underlying causes of our intersecting crisis of inequality, climate change, and biodiversity loss. And this requires critical investigation of the actors and institutions that block transformation and the strategies that they use to keep the cultural hegemony of their false narratives intact. It also requires resistance against problem framings that distract attention away from these structural causes by promoting voluntary measures or by targeting individual behavior or consumer choices. For conservation science, it means that it has to stop producing and enabling top-down technocratic solutions. One example being the 30 by 30 proposal currently on the table for the CBD, which risks placing a disproportionate share of the burden of conservation onto those that have contributed the least to biodiversity loss. Clearly, there can be no environmental justice without social justice. For science, putting justice center stage means that we cannot allow dominant research practices to continue if they continue to enable and support injustice, if they impose the idea of a singular world that can only be known by science, thereby erasing not just alternative knowledges, but also the lives and practices that shape and are shaped by these knowledges. As Santos has put it, there can be no justice without cognitive justice. You may have deduced from what I've presented so far that the transformation of science in this direction will not be easy and that it will face resistance. However, we need to recognize that transformation cannot happen by only elevating nice things. We need to also, and at the same time, actively disempower those that resist change and abandon approaches that are harmful and intolerant of difference. As Karl Popper has famously said, the only thing tolerance cannot be tolerant of is intolerance. And this has to apply to knowledge production as well. Ironically, of course, those that will actually say this will be seen as intolerant. It follows that pluralism is both a condition for and an outcome of justice. The challenge of political ontology, as Arturo Escobar, among others, has noted, is to see struggles over knowledge as struggles over human and non-human lives, practices and realities. They are struggles to shift from the oppression of a singular world to a world where many worlds fit, a pluriverse. This suggestion should, of course, not be seen as a solution, nor is it a utopia because that would defeat the purpose. The important point here, and drawing on the work of Chantal Mouffe, is to put continuous effort into allowing those struggles and contestations to occur in the public space, instead of placing science outside politics or allowing science to foreclose the possibility of politics. The pluriverse requires that spaces of knowledge production are included in political and agonistic debate and contestation. So our central task then is to create open-ended and anti-colonial methodologies, technologies and designs that allow for the pluriverse to flourish. Where does this all lead to, you may ask? I put the word sustainability here, but I'm deeply troubled by it for two reasons. First of all, the impetus to define goals and outcomes is one of the ways that science has gotten into trouble. The assumption that we only know what to do if we have well-defined objectives translated into targets and indicators is not just frankly absurd, it has also produced bad outcomes. We all know examples, particularly in academia, I would say, where the focus on outcomes has enabled practices that actually corrupt underlying objectives, even when they meet targets and indicators. So it behooves us to approach this question with openness and humility. The second reason why sustainability makes me uncomfortable is that we've seen what it has done in practice. The false narrative of green capitalism has been massively enabled by the idea of sustainable development and by the splitting up of sustainability into the three pillars of people, planet, and profit. This has facilitated the emergence of hierarchies between these three supposedly equally important targets. And what this has done is that it has again put nature against people. Some argue, for example, that we need profit first, as the main condition to be able to take care of people and planet. This is well embedded in economic theory, in the Kuznets curves, and the false idea of trickle-down economics. First, the environment and people will have to suffer until enough profit is made to be able to take care of them. There are also those that have suggested that nature is the condition for the other two. This is what's behind the infamous wedding cake interpretation of the Sustainable Development Goals. The idea here is that we first need to protect nature before it's too late. People will just have to wait because without nature we'll all be doomed anyway. Transformative change, however, requires that we reject both and the false dichotomies that they're based on. But again, you may ask, what's the alternative? The reason why we so often draw a blank when it comes to imagining positive futures is also the reason why we so desperately need them. Cultural hegemony has successfully implanted the idea that there's no alternative, that our societies and economies and our human and non-human nature are naturally given. So we need ideas and visions that can challenge and supersede this existing ideology. There are promising initiatives that innovate our ideas of economy, society, and nature in academia as well as in society. You can actually easily recognize them by the way in which cultural hegemony continues to ridicule, marginalize, and erase them. They'll be seen variably, and I've heard them all, as left-wing hobbies, as not constructive, as anti-freedom or communist, as irrational, anti-science, or romantic. Degrowth and solidarity economics, libertarianism, and agroecology are all examples of ideas that continue to receive those kinds of accusations. This is a sign, of course. If elites feel the need to marginalize and ridicule people and ideas, this is because they feel threatened by them. And this in turn might mean that they might be up to something useful and that you should consider joining them. The end point of transformative change should not be defined, and especially not by science. I do, however, see it as our task to foster the generation of radical alternative imaginaries, as well as options for change that are guided by values of justice and pluralism. Knowledge and learning are indispensable parts of this. Processes of transformation are complex, and they will inevitably create unanticipated effects. We need to build knowledge infrastructures to track these changes and effects. But we need to do so in ways that counter the current emphasis on key performance indicators, control, and evaluation, and that facilitate emancipation, learning, and reflection. I'm inspired by storytelling as an ingredient for these knowledge infrastructures. Stories are important because they are relational. When you tell a story, you enter into a relation in which you stand to learn just as much as the listener. Stories resist hubris and detachment because they combine the emotional, the personal, the factual, and the fictional. Stories are also incomplete, open, and multiple. There should not be a story that is able to rule them all. They cannot have everything, Catherine McKittrick writes. This chair is personal to me, and I'm grateful and humbled by the trust granted to me to fill this position. It is also personal in the sense that this is not just a job for me. And it is, of course, a great privilege to be able to say this, and I'm very aware of this. But what this does mean for me is that I'm here as a person, with values and emotions, and with a deep felt sense of responsibility and commitment. And this is why I need to bring this close to home now, to the university. And it's also fitting for a chair of science, technology, and society that I dedicate myself not just to improving relations between the university and society, but also its inner workings. The university is in dire need for a better story, and it has been for some time now. The same cultural hegemony, with its values of effectiveness, efficiency, and productivity that are destroying the planet, also rules our institutions. The sense of self of many academics has been profoundly shaped by these values, including how they view their own worth and success, and how they compare themselves with others. This ideology breeds competitiveness. Competition is a core foundation in current research systems. It is not only a result of current scarcity in funding, as we often prefer to think, it is a cause of this scarcity. And in turn, competition breeds precarity, exclusion, and injustice. After all, not everyone can be successful, right? Blinded by the illusion of meritocracy and a general lack of fair and transparent procedures, Universities create all kinds of exclusions on the basis of paradigm, gender, race, neurodiversity, or health. So despite all the care and commitment that many of us bring to our job, our institutions, as the saying goes, do not love us back. In case of perceived threats, the main interest and knee-jerk response of the institution will be to protect the institution. And as Sarah Ahmed has pointed out, in practice, this means that it will protect specific people, those people that hold power in our institutions over other people that are seen as disposable. Those of you who know me know that I'm not a pessimist. I'm not. I would not be here if I did not believe that the better knowledge is indeed possible, that we can create better universities, better teaching and learning systems, and better science and technology. I'm regularly reminded of this potential. Just a few weeks ago, I had the pleasure to teach our Transformative Research PhD course with wonderful colleagues from Eindhoven, Wageningen, and Utrecht University. This course is special because of the learning environment that we collectively create with the students. This course deprioritizes assessment and knowledge dissemination to allow for values and emotions, humility, questioning, and generosity. And it is amazing what is possible when you do this. And I believe we need much more of this in bachelor and master teaching. And I'll put effort into making that happen. The students in our PSTS master program that I have the pleasure to teach also remind me of this possibility. I've been truly touched by their commitment and generosity. My first year at this university has been hectic and overwhelming, but also amazing. And I'm starting to see that I could not have gone to a better place with this vision. A special thank you goes out to our colleagues at STEPS, JEPS, and Philosophy and WTMC, to our previous dean, Theo Tone, and our current dean, Tanja Bonderoek, Peter Balverbeek, Wieteke Willemen, and Karim Pfeffer, who really went out of their way to make me feel welcome from day one. The friendship of colleagues, many of you are here, in the Netherlands and internationally means everything to me. Too many to mention, but I think you know who you are. So thank you for your support, your kindness, and your company. I would also like to thank my colleagues and friends in IPBES. IPBES processes are frustrating, but I'm also grateful for having met so many wonderful colleagues there to collectively enjoy and discuss the challenges and merits of global interdisciplinary assessment processes. So creating better knowledge is the core ambition of my chair, and this requires collaboration outside academia. I'd like to give a big thank you to organizations such as Weiland and Agroecology Federation for inviting the likes of me into their midst. I hope to reach out to many more also in the Twente region. And then finally, to my friends and family, to Leni, Wim, Sander, Jerry, Luc en Anne, there are no words, just thank you. Ik heb gezegd.
Thank you very much for such a warm appreciation of this address. And I have made some notes, but I would like to start with thank you, Esther. Thank you very much for this call. I call it as a call. And we may be interested in STS, environmental studies, ecology, technology, or we may not. But we may not definitely be neutral to this call for a better knowledge, whatever field of your study is. And I suppose that there are some people here who came because they're interested in science or in research. I would say this address to me, and I hope you share my opinion, is a celebration to make this position for Professor Turnhout as the Chair of Science, Technology and Society at our faculty at this university. I'm very thankful to the former Dean, Theo Tonen, Professor Tonen, that this appointment has happened and took place. This address is also to me a beautiful call for a reflection of the role of science and society, our profession. A very inspiring, thought-provoking, open for the debate. I assume that not everybody agrees with every word, but that's why we are here. Let's discuss, let's debate, let's disagree, but let's move science further for a better knowledge. Should science serve society, or should science be a vehicle to change societies? That's the question I would ask everybody to think about. I was glad to hear all the examples, and I'm not here to repeat them. We will have a discussion after all. Once again, thank you very much. And I also have prepared a quote, not from Sir Karl Popper. I have personal difficulties with that, but a quote from the Portuguese scientist where Esther started her presentation, Professor de Sousa Santos. We have the right to be equal whenever difference diminishes us. We have the right to be different whenever equality decharacterizes us. And with this, I would like to thank Professor Turnhout for her inaugural address. And once again, I invite you to give applause to her.